Hello biology students, you are now at your last lesson of this topic, B18.12, which is all about sustainable food production. In this lesson, you need to be, by the end of it, you need to be able to describe what sustainable food production means, and you need to be able to explain how food production can be made sustainable using examples. So, your quick task today might seem a bit off topic, but what I want you to do is tell me what fast fashion is and if it is considered sustainable. So, title, date and objectives, complete the quick task, and when you're ready for the answers, press play to move to the next slide. So, as I'm sure you're already aware, fast fashion is considered to be unsustainable. This means it can't continue to be produced and consumed at its current rate. So at the moment we are making clothes and wearing them and binning them. Our consumption of fast fashion is very high and our planet cannot cope with this because the production of fast fashion includes a lot of pollution made, whether that's from the factories and the chemicals and the fuel that they use, or through, as you can see in this picture here, the amount of waste that we produce when we just throw away fast fashion. It's too much impact on other people, so actually individuals are suffering for this, but certainly in poorer countries and in developing countries, because that's where the cheap labour is used in order to make these fashion, and the people are not looked after properly and don't have good working conditions. And also there's not enough resources, so the rate at which we're growing cotton and producing plastic fibres can't keep up with fast fashion consumption. So obviously something has to change there. So how does this link into today's lesson? Well, we need to think about sustainable food production. We've talked about sustainable clothing production. So what I want you to do is look at these pictures, pause the video, you can have a think, write down some bullet points or talk to someone that you're watching this video with and decide what sustainable food production means. So pause the video and have a think about it. Okay, so all of these images are showing sort of the ideas around sustainable food production. So we'll start off in the top left corner. So the way that we produce food, process it, distribute it or share it out, make sure that people have access to it, the way that we consume it without making too much waste, and resource and waste recovery are all to do with sustainable food production. So for example, with the waste part, it's about putting it in the compost and making sure you don't buy too much and waste too much food. This image here is showing how food production can be increased using certain biotechnological resources, and also when we consider that the Earth's population is increasing, we need to increase our food production without like making sure we run out, make sure that we have enough for the future even though the population is growing. When we think about sustainability, we need to think about how it affects the economy, how it affects different people, and how it affects the environment. And locally grown food is best because you're not having to transport it further away. It's less likely to be wasted. So overall, you're not going to be affecting the planet as much if you go for locally grown food. So here's a definition for you about what food sustainability is. Food sustainability means that food production activities do not consume or destroy resources or the environment. So we don't want to completely run out of resources and we don't want to destroy the environment. So the examples we've got here, this is called a moa, and it was a giant land living bird that was alive in New Zealand hundreds of years ago, but it was hunted to extinction. So that wasn't sustainable because it didn't reproduce at a fast enough rate to cope with how much it was being hunted. Our production, this is an image of the rainforest here, and here is a field of palm oil trees. And the problem is that we're chopping down the rainforest and destroying the rainforests in order to produce our food. And actually what we need to do is make palm oil production more efficient. So let's have a look at sustainable fishing. Sustainable fishing means that we are leaving enough fish in the ocean, respecting habitats, and ensuring people who depend on fishing can maintain their livelihoods. So again, I'd like to pause the video here, discuss or write some bullet points or have a think about how we try to make fishing sustainable. So pause the video, have a think about it, and press play when you're ready to move on. So some of the methods by which we make fishing sustainable is by having organisations such as the Marine Stewardship Council, who can advise fishermen and organisations on how to make fishing sustainable, work together to build quotas that are actually realistic and allow fishermen and fish people to continue to have a livelihood and catch the fish, but also make sure that there's still enough fish left in the oceans to grow and reproduce so they don't go extinct. Another way in which food production fishing can be made sustainable, is by having trackable fishing and being responsible for where that fish comes from. So if you look at a can of traceable fish, sometimes it'll say where the fish has been caught, like what area, what country, what region of the sea, and there'll be a number on there that you can enter on the website to prove that this tin of fish has been sustainably caught by a traceable company, a traceable fisher person. Another thing to bear in mind is that not long ago, I think it was about 2015, Bangladesh was really suffering in the oceans around there because fish were going extinct, it was being overfished, there was pollution, there was too much trawler fishing, and the Bangladeshi government decided that they were going to ban fishing in certain areas, which was a good thing because it did allow fish stocks to regenerate and recover, not be attacked by fishermen all the time. But the problem was, obviously, it was the coastal towns suffered because that was their income and that was their livelihood. So there was a real problem there for the fishermen living in that area. So some of the ways we maintain fish stocks is by using nets with larger holes so that the big fish can be caught, but the small fish can escape through those holes and grow to adult size and breed. So we're not going to fish the juveniles or the young fish, we're just going to take the adult fish out of the water. And in this image here, you can see actually it's actually different species of fish. So the ones that we actually want to catch are big enough to stay in the nets, whereas these fish that we don't want to catch, we don't want to destroy their populations, they can escape through these little small holes. So by making fishing nets with different size holes, we can allow smaller fish to escape and only catch the big fish. You can also ban fishing during breeding season. So at certain times of the year, we can tell fishermen, no, you are not allowed to catch this particular species of fish. That gives them time to complete their breeding season, reproduce, and it means that the fish numbers in the oceans won't be depleted or won't go down. And lastly, having strict quotas that fishers have to stick to. So they're only allowed to fish a certain number of tons of a certain number of species in a given time period. And what that means is that they're going to have to leave some fish. Sometimes the fish get caught and they die and they have to throw it back anyway. But it still means that overall they stop at a certain point. They don't just keep fishing and fishing and fishing as much as possible to make as much money as possible. So having strict quotas is a good thing. So your task for the first half of this lesson is just to write a short paragraph summarising the following points. I want you to explain what overfishing is. I want you to describe some of the problems it's caused, and then list ways in which we can make fishing more sustainable. So you could use rewind the video and use some of the information from there, or you could look at your textbook on page 308. So pause the video, complete this task, and press play when you're ready to move on. So for the second half of this lesson about food sustainability, we're going to look at biotechnology. So firstly, we've looked at genetically modified food in chapter B13 of the biology GCSE. And I've also mentioned in a previous lesson that you can genetically engineer food to be resistant to disease. So we've got a tomato here that has tomato blight on it. But you can genetically engineer tomatoes, and these tomatoes here have been genetically modified, the seeds were grown, and that produces a new crop that is resistant to that disease. So it's not going to get the disease, you're going to produce more tomatoes, which is good. Another thing that you would have looked at in a previous topic is golden rice. It has better nutrition. So in certain areas, poor areas or developing countries, one of the staple foods that they can grow easily and can eat plenty of is rice. But the problem is rice isn't very nutritious. It's not got lots of vitamins and minerals in it. And one of the problems that we were seeing in these developing countries with children were growing up without proper nutrition and going blind. So there's a vitamin A is important for eye development, and you find it in carrots. And if we genetically modify rice to produce vitamin A, it looks golden in colour. It doesn't really change the taste or the ability to grow it, but it makes it more nutritious. So if we can provide golden rice to people in developing countries, they can grow golden rice instead of regular rice and have better nutrition. And it means that children will develop properly, they'll have all the nutrition they need, they won't go blind. This is my favourite part. So the best part about biotechnology, for my opinion, is mycoprotein. So you've probably seen this more as corn. And get some hot and spicy burgers or some mince. So that's sort of like beef substitute made out of mycoprotein. Southern fried bites, which I've put here and here just because I love them so much. So we've got two images of the southern fried bites here, which are just like southern fried chicken. And also we've got the pieces here, which are again like little pieces of fake diced chicken, and you can use them in any other recipe where you would use chicken. So that's another version of corn, and the third version of corn I've got on here is the Greggs vegan sausage roll, which is really yummy and nowhere near as greasy as a real sausage roll, and it's made to replicate sausage meat. So this one food source can be, the texture can be changed, the flavour can be changed, and it can replace lots of different types of meats. So how is this done? Well, firstly, mycoprotein literally translates as a protein from fungi. So it's a kind of fungus that lives in the soil, and it just grows there, and it was discovered in the UK, and it was named after the village of Quorn in Leicestershire. That's where they got the name from. It's really easy to grow. All you need is a big metal vat, and you add moisture, and you add oxygen, and glucose syrup, which is very cheap to produce because it's made from waste starch. So let's say there's another part of the food industry that's making grain-based food or potato-based food, and there's waste starch from that process. That can just be converted into glucose syrup, very cheaply made, to feed the mycoprotein. It's cheap and easy to get hold of. So the other things that the mycoprotein need are warmth, moisture, and time to grow. It is much more efficient and much more sustainable than meat production, so much less energy is used, and as I've said, it's more sustainable. It's the sort of thing that means that there's plenty available, easy to make, it won't have impact on the environment in the same way that meat production would. And this is how the fermenter vessel works. So this picture is taken from your book. So if you want to go over it again in your own time, if you don't understand it at all, just have a look in your textbook. I think it's on page 309. So what have we got here? We have got this, first of all, is the vat, and it's been cut in half right down the middle to show you a cross-section image of the inside. So inside this vat, we have the fungus growing, and we add water and glucose syrup to that, and also you can see here the oxygen is being bubbled in so that they can respire aerobically. It also needs to be the correct temperature. Okay, so what happens is, as the mycoprotein is respiring inside this vat, it's releasing warmth, it's releasing heat energy as a waste of energy. Like, it just respires to grow, but there is some warmth basically. So what is done is the vessel is completely surrounded by a water jacket. Now you can't, it looks here on this image like it's two bars on either side, but remember this is a cross-section diagram, so actually the entire vessel all the way around is surrounded by this water cooler jacket. Cold water is pumped in. The heat energy made by the respiring mycoprotein transfers from an area where it's hot to an area where it's cold into the cold water and warms it up, and the warm water comes out here. And as you know, warm fluids rise, so that's why this tube is up here. There's also a motor here that keeps the contents stirring, keeps them moving. So that helps to keep things well distributed, including the oxygen. So as the oxygen bubbles up, the stirrers move around and around and keep the whole thing aerated so that it's all respiring aerobically. So let's have a look at this list on the side. Correct temperature we've done. Moisture, yes, we know that water is added. Food, yes, we know that glucose syrup is added. And oxygen, yes, we know that oxygen is bubbled up from the bottom. So last of all, we have to make sure we're monitoring the temperature and pH and so forth, because if it gets too acidic because of the carbon dioxide that the respiring microorganisms are giving out, that could be dangerous for them. We don't want it to get too hot either. If it's too hot, the enzymes inside those mycoprotein organisms will denature, change shape, and they will die. They won't be able to carry out their biological processes. And at the end of the process, there's a little tube at the bottom here that shows that it's an outlet, and that's for harvesting the culture. So once they've all grown and doubled inside and had all that time and nutrients and oxygen that they need, they've all grown, and you just harvest it out of there. So for your last task, what I'd like to do is use pages 308 to 309 of your GCSE AQA Biology book on Caboodle. I want you to imagine you're working for the Sustainable Food Trust, which is a charity, and you're making a leaflet on their behalf. So your leaflet needs to persuade people to buy and eat more corn. You need to include information on how it's produced, and you need to explain why it is considered sustainable. So there'll be some information from the video that I've given you, some information in the book, complete your task, and then we'll do the plenary. Okay, so for our plenary today, we're going to look at doing an exam question. So the image that you've got here of a fermenter is different from the one I've just shown you. So don't be thrown off if you go into the exam and there's a question about producing fusarium or producing corn and it's an image you've not come across. They will just expect you to understand the processes. They will expect you to understand how it's made, not memorize one particular diagram. You have to be able to look at the diagram and kind of work it out for yourself. So read this question and answer the first question. So you need to draw a ring around the correct answer out of these three items. And then we'll move on to the next question. Okay, so they're expecting you to look at this diagram, understand what it's showing, and know what the things are that are needed in order to grow mycoprotein. So fusarium make mycoprotein. Fusarium respires aerobically. So what is needed for aerobic respiration? Complete question part 2 and part 3 for 1 mark each. So pause the video, write your answers, and move on when you're ready. Here's the last part of the question. It's worth 2 marks. So read that, pause the video, answer the question, and then we'll go on to the answers. So part 1 of the question, part A of the question, my apologies, is all about the mycoprotein production. So fusarium is a fungus. You should definitely know that by now. In terms of the diagram, there was a tube at the bottom and a tube at the top. The tube at the bottom was pumping in oxygen or O2. Air will be accepted on this particular mark scheme, but I think you really need to be careful and use oxygen. They will accept O2 with the 2 down here, but not O2 up here, or O on its own, or O with a big 2 next to it. It has to be what is called a subscript 2, so O and then a little 2 down here, okay, because that indicates the number of atoms in that molecule. This is incorrect. This is talking about as if it's ionic. This is talking about 1 molecule of oxygen floating around on its own, which you wouldn't get. An O2 like this means 2 individual molecules of oxygen made up of 1 atom each. So make sure you're writing your chemical formulae correctly, please. The part 3, the answer was glucose syrup. So that was the tube coming in at the top of the fermenter and dumping the syrup in. They would allow carbohydrates or sugars, but they would not allow food or starch. Starch would be too difficult for the mycoprotein to digest. So it has to be glucose syrup or sugar. Now, if you hadn't given oxygen in part 1, they would have allowed it in part 2. Sorry, part 2 to part 3. And these are the answers in relation to eating corn instead of eating meat produced from animals. Now, remember, this is a comparative question. So they're asking you for the advantages of corn compared to factory farming. So quicker is needed. If you say quick, that's not good enough. You have to say quicker because you're comparing it. You could say it's suitable for vegetarians. You could say cheaper again. And also you could have said it's more efficient or it uses less land, or less methane is produced. If you put it's high in protein, or sustainability without really explaining it, or if you put less pollution without really explaining it, you would not get that mark. If you put less animals harmed or killed, or it's more ethical or something like that, they would allow that, ethical for animals. If you've put anything about the food chain is shorter, or there are less trophic levels involved, they would allow that, because that's linked to the concept of efficiency. If you put less energy lost from the food chain, again, that's similar to this answer here, so that would have been allowed. If you put no energy loss, that would not be considered the correct answer. Reason being, the mycoprotein, the food chain that the mycoprotein is in, the trophic levels look like this. So you've got the sugar or starch or glucose, sugar or glucose syrup. Starch would have been incorrect. So you've got sugar or glucose syrup. Then you've got the fusarium. And then you've got the person. So actually there is some energy lost between this first trophic level and the second trophic level, so that's why it's not allowed. If you put anything about it being lower in calories than meat, lower in fat than meat, or healthier than meat, you would be allowed that mark. And if you added anything about it being a good source of fibre or it prevents constipation, whereas obviously eating only animal meat would make you constipated, they would allow a mark for that as well, for a maximum of 2. So what did you get out of 5 for that? Have a think about that and have a think about if you've met today's objectives. Can you describe what sustainable food production means? Can you explain how food production can be made sustainable using examples? As usual, if you're unconfident on either of those, you need to complete some further study. As always, I'll be recommending Primrose Kitten, Free Science Lessons, The Amoeba Sisters, BBC Bite Size and GCSE Pod. And for those of you who have really stuck with all this lockdown work, I am so proud of you. You have done really, really well. And I want you to know that in the run up to September, so when we start back in September, you're going to need to revise. We are going to be giving you a test on the B17 and possibly B18 work. It may be at the same time or it might be 2 separate tests, and they won't be super difficult. We're only going to give you a few exam questions that are on the easier side, a bit like the ones we've done today, just to make sure you guys know what you're doing, you know what you've learned, you've actually been getting on with this lockdown work. Because, you know, some people I know haven't really been sticking to this work and haven't been completing all of it. So for those of you who have been doing it, well done, and you know that you need to revise ready for next September when you do your little test. So again, well done on completing the B18 topic. I'm very proud of you all and I want you to have a wonderful summer, and I'm really looking forward to seeing you all in September. So take care then, and I will see you soon. Bye.